Hi everybody, this is Kate Haley here with Glazer's Camera. Today we are doing our live streams on location at Olympic Studios in Seattle. So things look a little bit different. This is our first presentation of the day. We have another event happening this evening, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of this one. As you know or may know, this is part of our Fall Fest event that we're doing this week. Today is our third day of live stream presentations with ambassadors from a variety of brands, and we're super excited to chat with Kenneth Hines Jr., who's a ZEISS ambassador. Kenneth, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
I'm sure. As you said, it's ZEISS ambassador. I'm also ambassador for Saray, Google, and now Haida filters. And for people who are Lightroom users, if you have been using Lightroom prior to October 26th, you will have seen my picture as the splash screen cover, as I was on the cloud-based version for the entire year.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I recently was a speaker on Adobe Lightroom during the Adobe Max conference. So talking about more in depth of my post-processing with color adjustments.
Okay.
So for people that are, may want to learn more about utilizing Lightroom and really taking it the next step, it's a very fun session that I thoroughly enjoy teaching.
Oh, that's amazing. It's definitely, I love to play around with color, and there's a lot more control that you could do that you could not do in years past. So that's really awesome. And the Adobe Max conference, that is available for people to view online for a while, isn't it?
It will be available for a year.
Okay, cool. So for today, we're going to talk about cityscapes and landscapes versus street photography. And Kenneth is known for street photography, but we're going to talk about kind of the comparison and the difference in why he's shifted to doing more city and landscapes. He's also going to talk about Loxia and versus Batis lenses, who are made by ZEISS. And if you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to get those posted in the chat on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook, and we'll do some Q&A throughout. So don't be shy with those questions. He's going to be doing this presentation through Lightroom itself. So again, feel free to ask any questions that you have. With that said, Kenneth, I'm going to kick it back over to you to get started.
Awesome, and thank you. So, kind of my emphasis, the backstory. How did I go from cityscapes, landscapes to street? So the pandemic disrupted everybody. And it's probably the first time in a lot of people's lives where they had the opportunity to basically put their life on pause. And when my mind is on pause, it sometimes allows me to think of different things, maybe experiment in something that may have been on my mind, but I just didn't really have time to focus on it, marinate on it for a bit. Who knows? So when the pandemic hit, I literally had just got out of New York before they locked down. I think this was maybe 2 days before, leaving New York, going back to Atlanta, and then I was stranded in Atlanta for X amount of months. And I needed something to do. I think by the first month, I was still okay. Second month, I'm like, okay. By the third month, I'm like, okay, I need to do something. I need to do something. Well, there was no street. No one was in the streets. We're all locked down. There was nothing. If people wanted to really go out and photograph certain places where there was nothing, no people, and people went down to Times Square. People went down to Grand Central and photograph those places with no people. It's very rare to be in New York and you don't see people, just unheard of. So since I wasn't there, being in Atlanta, I had spare time, and I was like, I need to do something. And my business partner, who many people have seen on my Instagram, David, we actually had the time, it was a rarity where we're actually not traveling. Sometimes he's traveling and I'm home, or I'm traveling and he's home. It's never been where we're home together. And so we were just like, what do you want to do? I said, let's go shoot some waterfalls. So most people know me for street, but don't know that I started as a landscape photographer 12 years ago. So that's one of my original genres. Many people think that I'm new to landscapes. Nope, that's one of my original genres. Street is actually the newest. And so I haven't had the time to actually do any landscape or hikes and things. And I said, this is a great opportunity, especially with a lot of the parks. A lot of people aren't trying to get out. This is perfect time to go out. And so we started going to places that were around the state of Georgia, going to some of the surrounding states in Alabama, Tennessee, up in the Carolinas, even up to West Virginia, which is one of my favorite places at Babcock State Park, which this image here was taken, one that I absolutely loved. So we just decided, okay, let's make a list of places that we want to go, things that we want to see. And that's sort of how it started. By August, I took my first flight during the pandemic, which was to Los Angeles, and it was with a friend of mine, and it was for doing a totally different project. I was okay with flying just because there was no one in the airport. I've never seen Atlanta airport empty. And I was okay with flying because I booked based on the aircraft too. So it was a big plane. I had a lot of space. I felt okay. So just happened that my business partner and friend Dave had driven from Atlanta to California, I think the week before. So he was already in Los Angeles. So we connected with one another and we said, let's do a road trip. Originally, it was supposed to be, maybe a week or two. It ended up being a full month. And we went to 14 states. We went to, through Oregon, we went through Northern California, just photographing whatever it is that we saw. And we kind of went at it aimlessly, to where normally people know me for being very strategic as far as what I photograph. And we basically got a, okay, where do you want to go? I don't know. Let's see where we end up. That's literally how we approached this month-long road trip. So we went to, all of these fascinating places. Like this is Sparks Lake in Oregon, which was one of my favorites. And then Cannon Beach off the coast of Oregon. Oregon was probably my favorite state, but then I had never been to the Grand Canyon, so I had to see that in person. And it was just beautiful. So it was an opportunity to kind of slow down, really take in the scene, because I felt like I was really speeding through a lot of things. And that was very noticeable through some of the images that I was taking. I didn't feel like I was as accurate and didn't have that precision that I normally was accustomed to from myself. So that's kind of where the transition from using my autofocus ZEISS Batis lenses, using like, this is of course the lens that everybody knows. It's my 85 millimeter 1.8 lens, which I've used that for pretty much the majority of the street images that people have seen. But I was noticing I was making careless mistakes, and that wasn't like myself. So sort of as a reprimand to myself, I decided, okay, I need to switch to manual lenses for a bit, because they change your sort of shooting capability or your shooting workflow to where you're not approaching it as quickly as before. So you actually have to take the time, you have to have patience. You actually really have to sort of be meticulous as far as what you're doing, what type of composition you're trying to capture, because you don't have the technology working for you. You're the one that's the technology. You're the one that has to set that lens for that specific composition. And so I felt that I needed to slow down a bit. I need to really take in the scenes that I was actually witnessing. And that's something that a lot of times photographers now, because of the age of social media, we tend to cater what we capture based on, is this Instagrammable? Is this something that will attract people's attention on social media, as opposed to actually being at those places and enjoying them for ourselves? So I try to tread that sort of gray area of, I do want to have content that's engaging for people that view them on social media, but at the same time, that's not the driving force behind why I'm taking the picture in the first place. I started photography based off of memories. I just wanted to remember the things that I've seen, places that I've gone to. And I feel that helps me with my photography because I come at it at that approach. I didn't have social media 21 years ago. I didn't have a Facebook. I didn't have, you know, Instagram, all of these social networks back then. And so my approach is very different because I'm memory focused, whereas the social aspect of it comes last. So I really like the rendering that the Loxia lenses had. And so I bought I got the Trio from ZEISS. I have the 50 millimeter. This is a f2. And as you can see, look at how small the lenses are. Very small, compact lenses. When you're going on long hikes, you don't want to have heavy gear. And so I have that lens. This is the 35 f2. And then on my new camera, which is the Sony Alpha 1, which if people follow me online, they'll know this is a Leah. I name all my cameras. I've been enjoying the A1. And so on the A1, I have the 21 Loxia, which is a 2.8 lens with a ND filter on right now, Haida ND filter. As I'm here in Hawaii doing some landscape photography, of course. So I really like using those lenses. And one of the questions that always comes up, why don't you just use your autofocus lenses and just set it to manual? Because it's not the same. It is not the same. Now, if you had older DSLR cameras, you know, if you were someone who had the Sony A mount system, or if you had Canon DSLR or Nikon DSLR, if you look at the lenses, they had a ton of numbers and markings on them. Whereas on the mirrorless side, a lot of lens manufacturers, they don't even have anything on the lens. It's just completely bare. You know, take the Batis lens, for instance. You don't have anything on it. You just have this OLED display on it. Well, the reason why manual focus on these type of lenses doesn't work the same way as using a mechanical lens like the Loxia is because you don't know precisely where the focus is set to. Now, the Batis, however, is one of the exceptions because switching it to manual, you can actually see the distance in that screen, where other lenses using that focus by wire system doesn't work the same way. So in order to do manual focus, to do it precisely, you need to have these markings, which is very important there. Get that in focus. Yep, that's very important to have. So I know based on the distance of what I'm photographing, I can just set the lens and I know that I'm going to have my image in focus based on, you know, that distance by setting that lens, by using the zone focus, setting my aperture to say if I'm at f8, okay, look at the 8 marker on the lens. Anything within the 8 markers on this lens, that's going to be the range that's in focus. So it's easy to do it that way as opposed to a focus by wire system. So that's how that sort of transition came about. I started doing the Loxias at the end of December in 2019. Once the pandemic took place, I just decided I'm going to go full on manual lenses. And now I've pretty much have, I would say maybe 90% of what I do now is manual lenses. Like here in Hawaii, all of what I've been shooting has been with the Loxia lenses. I just prefer doing cityscape and landscape work on the manual lenses. It just feels so much better. That's how I feel about it. So any comments, questions at that point?
Well, I'll ask a question based on what you just said. Do you feel like by using that manual process, it helps you kind of slow down and really be a little bit more present and in the moment?
Yes. It also helped me to where, so one thing that a lot of people biggest fear about with manual focus is not being able to set the focus quickly enough to obtain certain images. Once you actually master the lens, I actually do street photography with I have the 85 Loxia. So I have two 85 lenses. And I will actually decide, okay, I don't want to shoot autofocus. I'll take the Loxia version. And it's 2.4 lens, but it's still, perfectly fine for what I'm doing. And it's a very compact lens. I've actually shown people, I did a photo walk earlier a few months ago. And I decided I'm going to do this photo walk with all manual lenses. And I shot with that 85 2.4. And so I showed people just how I go about that process. And they're like, wow, you're actually doing that pretty quickly. Yeah, because it's one of the crazy quirks of my mind. I was majoring in physics and mathematics in college. I see everything in numbers. So I'm calculating things on a consistent basis. And so I'm gauging where a subject is and then calculating, okay, what is that distance? Then I'm also calculating focal length. What lens do I need? Because I shoot all prime lenses.
Right.
So I need to be very precise as far as what lens option that I have. Because especially in doing landscape, you don't want to be changing lenses all the time when you're out in the elements. So I like to go out and be certain of the lens choice before I leave. So once I've cleaned my sensor and cleaned the lenses, I don't have to worry about, changing several times while I'm out.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid that. So it definitely has changed how my whole thought process is. I tend to take better images because I'm now focused more on the quality of the composition as opposed just to getting the shot.
Right.
And not really taking the time to think, is that the best shot? Because once I set up, I'm adjusting my focus or looking through that viewfinder or looking at the rear screen. No, that composition doesn't work. Let me turn slightly. Whereas with an autofocus, because it's like you half press or back focus, you set the focus, you just take the picture. You might not think at that very moment, was that the best composition? And that's why I like shooting with the manuals.
Cool. All right. Well, we can keep going. Again, if you guys watching have questions, get those questions put in the chat room. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep coming up with questions.
So my latest acquisition has been the Sony Alpha 1. When the camera came out, I kid you not, the very second it was available for pre-order, I ordered it. So I had the A7R3 at first. I went back and forth between the R2 and the R3. I was never sold on the R3 just because the focus wasn't the greatest in my workflow with that camera. So in the later months that I had with that camera, I exclusively assigned it just to my manual lenses. I wasn't using it with any autofocus lenses. So I think I had the R3 3 times, and then I went to the R2 twice. So the reason I kept going back and forth is because, well, I like the R2 for its focusing. It was, even though it was an older system, it still was more accurate. The issue was the battery life. And then I was now going out having two different battery types. I have the one that goes in the A9, but then I had the one that goes in the A7R2. And if you've shot the A7R2, it drinks up battery pretty quickly. So you have to take like 5, 6 plus batteries for that camera if you're planning to really do some serious shooting with it. So I didn't like it for that one purpose, but that was it. So then I decided, though, I'm going to let it go and go back to the R3. And I just wasn't happy with it. So once the A1 came, I said, this is it. This is it, because it had the controls that I loved of my 9, but then it gave me the resolution of an R. Now, I don't mind shooting 24. I've always pretty much shot 24 megapixels for several years now. It's perfectly fine for the print sizes that I do. I mean, I've had an image printed 11 feet from a 24 megapixel file. So I'm I've never been one who needed more than 24. I think that was a nice sweet spot. But when the 1 came out, all of the features that it had was basically my 9 on steroids. And I knew it would also fix the issue of the focusing that I encountered in using the 7R3. So the very second I pre-ordered it, took about a month and a half or 2 months for the camera to come. And yeah, it was perfect. It's a little bit more heftier. Like, I have small hands, so it was a little bit of a difference getting used to such a bigger grip camera. But the features just outweigh that, to where I just really, really love this camera. And I did a project for ZEISS back in April where I shot the Otis lenses, which are the top of the line still lenses for ZEISS. And it was my director's idea. It's like, well, if you're using the flagship camera of Sony, why not use the flagship of ZEISS? I'm like, I like where your mind is going there. I just planned on using Loxias, but I was like, I'll take you up on that. Let's bring those Otis lenses out, because they're just phenomenal lenses. So the A1 has just been my go-to camera for what I do. I don't take as many pictures with the 1 just because of the file sizes. They're much larger. And it's more geared towards having images that are really well thought out. It's not a camera that I utilize in a way where I'm just burst shooting or not really taking my time to think, because the mindset with the 1 is I'm sort of going into the next stage of my career, really wanting to kind of challenge myself a little bit more. I think I want to really obtain more work that I think is more captivating, things that are a little bit more interesting, may focus on things culturally or whatever it may be. So my sort of quantity of images is decreased significantly, whereas I'm trying to improve on the quality of the content that I produce. So like today, for instance, I mean, I was out for 3 hours and I only took maybe 55, 60 images, which is actually a lot. There are some times where I've gone out, I kid you not, I will only take 2 photos. And that happened once, where my friend and I, we went to waterfall in Tennessee. I saw the composition immediately. I knew what I wanted. And so I take both orientations of vertical and horizontal. Why? The horizontal I use to sell on my website in, large format prints. The vertical I utilize for posting to social media. The vertical images just display better on Instagram than having the horizontals, because it's a little bit smaller. Whereas if you're scrolling, the verticals sort of take up more real estate. So that's why I will take 2 different compositions that way. And so I did that. I took just 2 images, and I looked at my friend and he was like, "Oh, you're good?" I was like, "Oh yeah, we actually can go." He was like, "You're ready to go?" I said, "Yeah." But we just got down here. I nailed it. I don't need anything else. I know I got it. I don't question it. I know I got it. And sure enough, I ended up printing one of those. So for people who've seen any of my previous videos, it's one of the images that I normally have that's behind me during my live videos or pre-recorded videos, because I just knew right then and there, we got it. So that's what the 1 is sort of in line to do. It's for those type of moments where I can just take 1 picture. I know I nailed it. I know that. So like if we look here in Lightroom, so I took a collection of images that I have to kind of give you a little bit. I threw in a couple streets since I know people want to see that too. I know that. But I haven't done as much. So these are just some of the images that I've taken. This was a recent street image, but I didn't go out with the mindset of doing street. It just so happens I was doing a sort of cityscape image and just saw this lady next to me, and I said, "Oh, she looks very interesting. Let me take a picture." But it's you kind of see what the theme is here. These big, majestic, either vista or massive cityscape images. That's what I like to capture on the one. That's what the focus of that camera is. So the situation has to really be perfect for me to take a picture with that camera. And I think it has helped me to be a little bit more, I guess I would use hesitant to what I'm actually capturing, just because I'm now thinking more about the whole scenario. Okay, does this situation work for what I'm trying to do? Do I really see a composition here worth taking? Is there something that I really want to have in post and then edit? Those different things are going through my mind. I'm really looking for those really like jaw-dropping type images, something that when people see it, oh my gosh, how did you take that? That's what I'm looking for. And so like this was an image taken just a couple weeks ago on a little mini fall road trip. And so this is what I've been sort of up to lately. So I guess you could consider this maybe a partial street where it's not focused on one person. I'm focused on the sunset, but I'm just there in JFK terminal. And these people are checking in their bags at the terminal. And I'm like, that's a beautiful sunset. And I knew immediately I wanted to have a sort of silhouette of the people, but I still wanted a little bit of the detail where you could tell the texture of someone's clothes, for instance. Like you can still see some detail to where it's not a full silhouette, because I did not want that for that particular photo. And then, going out, catching sunrises and sunsets in New York. And all of a sudden lately, they've been really, really good, really, really good in the city. And so I'm focusing my attention more to images like this, kind of slowing down even when I'm out walking. New Yorkers, they generally speed past you. So I'm trying to slow it down a little bit, slow it down as I go throughout the city, because I'm looking for images like this. This is probably, so a lot of times I will go to locations and I will go back repeatedly because I know mentally what I want, but the scene hasn't been what I visualized. So I've shot this vantage point of Brooklyn Bridge Park numerous times in over 6 years. The last time I really got a good sunset here was back in 2018. This was almost taken exactly 3 years to the date this year from my previous favorite. This was the best sunset that I've gotten. Do I feel like I could get something better? Possibly. If I never took this shot again, I'm content because this is what I wanted. That's what I wanted. I knew I've been wanting a shot like this for years, and I finally got the perfect one for me. So the one that I did before, I went longer in the exposure. It was maybe a 4 or 5 minute exposure, whereas this time, as you can see it, this was only 2 seconds. Why did I do a different exposure time on this image as opposed to the older one? One, because I knew I had that older image, which was perfect. I didn't want to replicate or try to replicate that same scene. What I wanted was, I got lower with this composition and I wanted the rocks in the shot. If I went longer on the exposure, as the water crashes over back and forth over those rocks, you've now eliminated those rocks because you won't be able to see it because the water has gone over it so many times. Because if I did 4 minutes for this exposure, you wouldn't have seen any of those rocks. I still want that texture to be there. So that's why I shortened the time of when the water would come in. I just want a little bit of glazing. That's it. I want a little bit of motion to where it's sort of strung out a bit, but not to the point to where it almost looks like it's ice. I didn't want that look. So I wanted the two images to be different because I knew these were going to be the money shots for me. But I didn't want to have an image that looked so close to the previous image, because then it's like, what's the point? What is the point? So then these are some new ones that no one has ever seen yet, because I've just taken them here in Hawaii. So of course, shot with the A1. This is the Loxia 21 and catching sunrise. So I'm for this particular photo, I'm actually submerged in the water. I'm waist deep right now. And my camera is right there in front of me. I'm not really, I am cautious with my gear, but I think I kind of pushed the envelope a little bit more than what others may. But I'm like, you know, something happens, okay, whatever. I mean, I still have a backup, you know, if I had to switch to the 9, I could. But I know what I want, and I'll sometimes push the risk factor a little bit just to get what I want. Because I don't want something that it's okay. I don't want just okay. I want what I want. So I'll go a little bit above to get the shot that I want. And so this was, I think this was yesterday morning, these two of capturing the sunrise, and I was out there for a few hours. And I mean, it was just majestic. So one thing too, the image wouldn't have been the same if it didn't have clouds. A lot of people always wonder, like, how do you get your images to look the way that they do? Look at the elements. There's usually key elements about my photos that's usually the same across the board. I have that signature contrast level, which makes my colors stand out further. They have a more rich nature to them. Of course, it also helps with the lenses. The reason I use the lenses that I do with ZEISS is because they're able to pull certain detailed features that I then emphasize with in post-processing. If I never edited a photo, it would still be fine. I'll show you what some of those look like. So like, let's look at this shot. You know, this is unedited. This is unedited. Of course, you know, once you pull a raw file, you know, your settings are removed. So if I just brought up the exposure back to like what it was in the camera, I don't need to do anything. I got what I want out of the camera, but what I do to get my signature style is I just exaggerate certain features. So to kind of demonstrate, you know, in talking about my sort of workflow, how I utilize Lightroom, you know, I look at certain characteristics in an image. There has to be a certain level of contrast in my image, because I basically tell people it's kind of like an illusion of what I'm doing. It's like there's really no secrets. I mean, someone could take the same image probably, but how I frame it and then what I edit with is usually how I get that sort of unique look that a lot of people have actually, you know, they try to do my exact look, and they'll come back and say, well, I tried everything that you've shown in this video, or I'm using the same camera brand and all this stuff, but yet my picture doesn't look like yours. Well, it's not. You can't exactly replicate another artist. You just can't. You can come very close, but everyone sees things differently. And on top of that, I've consistently shot the exact same equipment my entire career. You know, I've always shot Sony, I've always shot ZEISS, always used Lightroom. So I've had years and years and years to really master that look based on the equipment I've shot for over a decade. So it just makes it a lot easier. And then the ZEISS lenses, they're color matched. That helps a lot. So if I use a Loxia lens and decide I'm going to use a Batis lens, they're color matched lenses. So I'm not fighting in the program, editing based off of one reproduction that one lens is giving me, and then I put something else, and now I'm getting a different type of rendering from this specific lens. So it's like you're kind of editing for two different looks because you're getting two different looks there. You're using, you're not going to have the same consistency. That's why I use what I use for the consistent factor. So like for an image like this, how do I get that sort of look that I want? Well, I'll come in and first I like to straighten my images. And so we'll run our profile correction, which will be very minimal. We'll run our transform, level that off a bit. And if it doesn't, so I'm kind of what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at the spire of One World Trade, making sure that looks perfectly straight, as well as this water line here. So usually the program does pretty good. Sometimes I may say, no, I want to go a little bit more. So I may just adjust it here. And that looks good. That looks good to me. And so just to do really quickly, if I just did some really quick adjustments, let's say I bring up the shadows, I'm going to bring in the clarity. Now, I really like the new masking tool that's in Lightroom. So before I would have to highlight the entire sky region, but now I can just come in, hit select sky. The AI analyzes the image. Once it's done that, you see it's highlighted here in red. So if I turn off the overlay, let's bring in that clarity. Let's bring down the highlights. Let's bring in some black level. See, just by doing that, look at how I've really exaggerated those clouds. I still haven't done anything yet. I have not done anything. But look at the difference. Look at what having that additional contrast has done just to the clouds. But now look at the buildings, though. Look at how you now have such a defining line between the buildings and the clouds. That's all I do. That is all I do. So let's carry on. Let's bring in the buildings a little bit more. So I want those to stand out significantly from everything else because our skyline is the center focus here. So I'm going to just create a new mask and let's see what select subject gives me. Sometimes it does pretty good. If it doesn't, I can still fix that with the additional masks on that same set. So it's going to analyze, takes it a second. Something went wrong. I don't know what went wrong. At least it didn't crash. That would have been terrible. Okay, let's try it again. There we go. Okay. So let's see, our select subject has selected, I don't know what it has selected. I see it highlighted, but it's not showing me the highlighting. Well, we'll proceed on. So if I bring up the shadows, watch what happens. It should be activated there. Yeah, something's wrong with that mask. Let's redo it. Select subject.
So this is the newest feature in Lightroom, right? They just did the update with this feature for the masking.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be very upset. I think because it had that error, now my masking is not working properly.
No.
Oh, the joy.
Live demos, folks. But also, like I said, this is some newer technology in the program. So, but you've been doing other demos on this, right? Was this part of the demo that you did for Adobe recently?
So mine was drastically different from this.
Of course.
I actually taught in the cloud-based version and not the classic.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm gonna relaunch this and see if we can.
Do we want to do a couple of quick questions while that's relaunching?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So do you often shoot with a lens set to hyperfocal? That's one question from Vic that came in.
It depends on what I'm actually photographing.
Okay.
Not all the time.
Okay.
So what goes in, depending on the composition, I have times where I've shot a waterfall that's kind of in the distance. but then I'll have, say, rocks that are in the bottom of the frame that are more forward. Well, I may focus more midway through.
Mm-hmm.
So that way, when you look at the image, the rocks on the bottom are not thrown completely out of focus.
Right.
Even if you're shooting at, say, f11, f13, that will still be out of focus just because of that wide gap in the focus area. If you're focused so far in the distance, and then that's right there in front of you.
Right.
So it just depends.
Mm-hmm.
But if I am at, you know, when you're at infinity on the lens, what you have to do, so if this is all the way at the end, you have to kind of kick it out a bit. So it's like you'll hear the lens stop, but then you have to bring it kind of in. So that way it's in focus a little bit. So sometimes that's a little trick too, because if you go all the way to the end, the image it's not going to always be in focus. So you have to be very specific to that.
Right. And that's a trick that if you're doing any astrophotography, that is another trick that you need to know for that. So one more quick question while we're waiting for Lightroom to come back. Have you used the Otis 100mm 1.4? And if so, what do you think about it? Or do you love it or whatnot?
That is one of the best lenses I've ever used in my life.
So that's a yes, he likes it. He loves it.
I first used that lens last year, actually. This was at Imaging USA.
Okay.
And one of our ZEISS ambassadors, Tracy Page,
yes,
she had mentioned to me about using the Otis 100. And I said, okay, let me use this lens because she had just finished teaching a session. And so I attached it to my camera on the 9 and was doing some portraits of the model that she had there. I looked at her and I said, Tracy, what is this? To really put in perspective what that lens was, I'd never seen a lens that good. Now, I've been shooting ZEISS since 2008. I've never shot a ZEISS lens like that.
Okay. So
it was just so accurate.
Okay.
So accurate.
So now I want to try it. Well, and you know, we've done a couple of sessions with Tracy over the past year and a half too. So we love her. So if you're interested in that lens, I'll just put a pitch in for our rentals department. It could be available there maybe. If not, we can maybe try and facilitate that happening. I don't know. Get myself in trouble here as I continue to talk. But yeah, renting is also a great way to try things out if you're not 100% sure you're ready to invest. How is Lightroom doing? Is Lightroom back, hanging out, ready to do its thing?
Yep, we got our Lightroom back here.
And we have
that. I've always been afraid of that. Like this
well, these
is
things
the first
happen.
time ever that Lightroom has crashed. That's
pretty good. I've been using Lightroom quite a while. It's definitely crashed on me a couple of times in that 15 years or 12 years, I guess. It's about 2:45, so we have about 15 more minutes again for those of you tuning in. If you have any questions, please keep those coming in. And then, Kenneth, why don't we dive back into what you were demoing for us?
Okay, so let's go back and try this mask. There we go. See, now we have our highlighted mask. That's what we weren't seeing before because it crashed on me. So I was showing the select subject, and as you can see, it selected our skyline. But there are some buildings that are missing on this side. So how do you correct that? All you have to do is while you still have that same mask selected, you hit the add option, and you can add in any other mask that you want to. So in this situation, I would just add in a brush. And I will adjust the size of that and just come in and highlight those additional buildings that didn't get selected. And that's all you do. So now any adjustment that I make, it's going to account for both of those separate masks. The subject one, which, you know, I can rename these if I want to. Just for the sake of time, I won't do that here. So once I've done that, I'll just add in some white level. Now see how that just made that pop? Just in adding the white level. And bring up my highlights a bit. Add in maybe a little shadow. Now what I usually do, if I go up in shadow, I'll come down in the black. So by going up here in shadows, let's decrease the blacks. See how I retain the contrast? That's how I do that. And maybe add a little in clarity there. Now, I really could just stop there. That just gives you an idea of like what I utilize for my editing workflow in Lightroom as it, let's see, let's swap that. And we'll do that. Now we have the accurate way that's supposed to go. There we go. Because I forgot I created a virtual copy. So you kind of see, I still have not done any color adjustments. None whatsoever. This was strictly adjusting highlights and shadows and using those various masks for certain regions of the image. That's all I've done. It looks like a totally different picture just on those simple adjustments. So a lot of people think I get my look from post-processing. I don't. I start with the image out of the camera. Like I already have that file as close to perfect as I can. I just exaggerate it. That's all it is. That is all it is. So, you know, like what captivates me for the images that I take, I'm looking for color. I'm looking for things that really stand out to me in terms of when I look at it, what is it that I feel about that image? You know, there's a lot of things that I really look at as far as like this image. I photograph this skyline so often, but I wouldn't have taken this if there were no clouds. It just wouldn't have been the same. Like the clouds made that photo. So there are just certain things that I'm looking for, you know, like here, I've taken this shot a lot, but I've never taken this and had it look this way just because the sunrise was just so perfect that day. Perfect sunrise. And I go about my post-processing based on what the scene is and what I feel about it. So if you look at the unedited here, because it's a sunrise image, my mind immediately goes to warm tones because I'm focused on the sunrise. So that's how I dictate what the overall edit is going to be. So I'm going to make that image go more towards that side that I'm focused on when I took that image. So because I'm focused on the sun itself, okay, I need to make the image have a more warmer look to it. That's sort of how I go about the process of beginning an edit. And, you know, many people think I spend a lot of time editing my images. I really don't. Sometimes to kind of speed up the process, if I have images that are similar, so for instance, a waterfall, what I do is I save a preset. So that way, if I do another waterfall, I will copy that. I will select that preset, or I will go to an image that's similar, copy the settings, and then just paste it on that image and tweak as needed. So it saves me a lot of time. So I don't like to spend, you know, forever in a day in post-processing. I like to be out shooting. And that's just a way that, you know, I have the look that I want. At this point, it's just a matter of remastering or refining certain looks. Take, for instance, last year when Adobe updated, they added color grading. That replaced split tone, even though split toning is still there in the new color grading, but you have some added capabilities with color grading. I went back and remastered some of my images and remastered some of my presets and added the color grading. Now that we have the new masking, I can now utilize that to do certain things that I wasn't able to do before with the old tools. So it just, you know, as the program progresses, I'll sometimes go back and remaster certain things, and those new enhancements now allow me to pull and push certain things that I probably couldn't do before. Because like now with color grading, I can go even further than what split toning did on its own. So that's how the process goes. And that pretty much sums up everything. If there's any additional questions or any questions that you have.
Do I have audio?
Yep,
Okay.
you're here.
Can you hear me now? I didn't get a little signal from my buddy here today. if I was on. So let's see. I'm checking for questions. Does anyone have any questions? It's really cool that you were able to also highlight some of those new features in Lightroom. Honestly, I haven't updated my Lightroom yet to check that out, but I'm excited for it. Let's see. Love the waterfall shot. Someone's asking about clouds. Do you shoot less in the summer because you don't have them? I guess that depends on where you are and how clear.
I will generally photograph during fall and winter just because there's less people, not necessarily
Fair.
because of, you know, there being any difference of sunrises and sunsets
Right.
at those different times. So it's not dependent on that. It's just more so about people, really.
Well, and also I know for me, so I'll sometimes do a sunrise somewhere instead of a sunset because also less people. But obviously you have to consider which direction the sun is and the thing that you're lighting up.
That is true.
So Jim says he doesn't have any questions, but he has a lot of thinking to do about what he wants his photos to be. And this is a conversation that he and I have had from time to time over the years. Do you use any apps or websites to predict conditions?
Yes, so I'm big fan of photo pills.
Okay.
I use that to where I can, you know, search my location, drop the pin, see exactly where the sun is going to rise and set. That it actually was very useful on the road trips.
Mm-hmm.
You know, locating the Milky Way.
Right.
You know, I can use the artificial intelligence of that app, and it's like, oh, there it is. Just set up my composition. Once I take the shot, I'm like, there it is. There we go. So, you know, like this, it's not the Milky Way because that was actually behind us, but this was one of the shots that taken on the road trip that we did last year out in, this is Shiprock, New Mexico.
Okay.
So most people don't know me for doing even astro. They're like,
right.
wow, you do astro. I'm like, I done this for many years. It's just, people may not see it, or because street is just so much more popular. I think because it's more accessible for a lot of people.
Right.
Where it's something that people feel like they can really do, as opposed to something like this, they feel it's a bigger challenge. When it's, I mean, the principle of a photo does not change. It's all about the lighting.
Yes.
It's all about the lighting.
And sometimes about the gear to help facilitate, like typically with astro or a lot of landscape photography, we would go a little bit wider traditionally for things. But it's funny because, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, yeah, that's early on, that was usually my limitation, is the gear. And my business partner told me this many years ago. He said, if you had the right gear in your hands, no one could touch you. And I didn't get that then, but then once I upgraded and really got the gear that I wanted, I'm like, it is easier. He was right. It took me a little bit to get there because, you know, it's expensive.
Right.
But once you have the right gear, it's like the more you learn, and it doesn't mean that once you have the gear and you ever stop learning or you're now at that peak. No, I'm still learning new things and trying new things. And like, I'm refining looks that I've created over the years, and I'm still getting better, even though I like where I am. I like the look, but I don't stay in that same position. I'm always trying to, you know, push myself further.
Well, and do you think part of that is because of kind of like a curious nature and trying to do new things, maybe experiment and do things a little bit differently than other people are?
It does, because I go on Instagram and I see a lot of images that photographers take, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a beautiful image. Just like coming here to Hawaii, there are pictures that I've seen that people have taken, and there are times where I will take a photo just because I want it in my portfolio that I've seen others take.
Yeah.
But I don't set my goals for getting those same exact images. Because, for instance, there's an image that I took of, and maybe I can pull it up really quickly here in Lightroom. I think I was shooting with the A1 that day. That was taken in Fulton Center, transit station in New York. And I knew what lens I needed in order to get a specific shot that I wanted. I needed a 12 to 24.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the rare instance where I had to use Sony lens because we don't have that focal length in the ZEISS. We don't have something that's a 12 millimeter.
Gotcha.
And so I specifically had the 12 millimeter lens. And I said, I know what the shot is that I want. I've never seen anyone take it. And it was this image here. I've never seen anyone go in this station and take this frame.
Okay.
Now, people have taken this.
Yeah.
They'll take it with the escalators down at the bottom, and you can see the rail lines. Or people will go in the middle where the elevator is to take, this is a very iconic shot of Fulton Center. People will go and take this shot.
Right.
But I've never seen anyone take that other shot. And I knew the only way I could get it was with a super wide.
Right.
So when I shared that online, people were like, I've never seen that angle. I'm like, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not, yes, I do want to have certain images in my own portfolio that I've seen online, but then I'm looking for things like this because that's how, how is it that I've managed to, to remain relevant and online and for people to keep their interest in what I do is because I always look for different things like that. I'm not trying to please Instagram.
You want to please yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just happen to share
Right.
what I like, hoping that other people like it. But then, I
Exactly.
also like teaching people what I do. Everything that I share, I teach. So
Awesome. I know that we had this conversation about the 100 1.4 Otis lens. Would that be your favorite lens for doing portraits? I know you don't really do a lot of that based on what we've talked about, but if you had to pick a portrait lens from the ZEISS lineup, what would be your choice?
funny story. There's a pro and a con to that.
Okay.
It would be my go-to choice. Here's the con to it. If you're photographing women, typically they don't want to be able to see every defining detail on their face.
Fair.
The ZEISS Otis is going to show that. I
even
had
at
a
like
model.
1.4, even at 1.4.
I don't ever shoot so
Wide
with
open.
the 100. I usually always shoot stop down.
Okay.
The widest I may go is usually maybe f2, and it depends on my distance. Because I want the fall off to like I want as much here in focus as possible. But that might help, if going to a 1.4 for some people. I had a model. She had the most perfect skin, and I told her this. You have the most perfect skin I've ever photographed. But she didn't think so, and she wanted to do like the app Facetune.
Oh no.
Where it softens. And I said, you don't have to do that. You don't. Her skin was perfect, but the Otis was too sharp. I actually had to switch lenses, and I went to the Batis 85 because it's not as sharp in detail. Like, it's still a perfect lens.
Yeah.
But it just didn't show as much. That's the difference. It didn't show as much. That's the con right there.
Okay.
It's perfect. Like, if I had my plans, I want the 100 because I'm going to do portraits. I have to use the 100. After that, I decided to retire instead and scrap the idea of getting 100. And here I am, just only doing cityscapes, landscape, and street. I stopped doing weddings and I stopped doing portraits. I offer no services at all anymore.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, everyone, we're going to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap up the session. Kenneth, I want to thank you so much, and ZEISS for helping to facilitate and make this happen.